was created by the Center to create redevelopment experience sharing between West Virginia communities. The idea is that we know that there are a lot of you doing really great things in your communities, and then there are other communities who are looking to do similar projects, and we want you to be able to learn from each other and to support you in sharing that information with one another. So the exchange has two components. The first component is experience sharing. Sorry, I'm having a feedback issue. I'm just going to address that real quick. The first component is peer-to-peer exchanges, which involve site visits. So like I said, there are a lot of you doing really great projects out there, and so we like to take folks to visit you. So for example, when we first got started, we had a community in Wellsburg, West Virginia that was looking at redeveloping a glass factory that was on a rail trail adjacent to a major river. And we brought them to Morgantown to see the Seneca Center, which is a completely redeveloped, remediated glass factory that's now a retail and office center. It's on the rail trail in Morgantown, and it's on the Monongahela River. And they were able to learn from each other and get some ideas for Wellsburg for how they can do something similar in their town. And we are always taking applications to do those site visits, those exchanges. If you're interested in being a host community, if you have a really cool project that you think people could learn from, you're welcome to shoot me an email or visit the website listed on the slide. And then if you're interested in going to learn about something, you can also do the same thing, and we will match you and help with travel expenses to get you to those places. The second component of the exchange are these monthly webinars, and these webinars focus on special topics in redevelopment based on the feedback that we're hearing from you, suggestions from our staff and our partners. And EPA grants are a big thing every year, and we're really glad to be able to have NJIT not only present at our conference earlier this month, but also to do this webinar with you today as well. So you can request an exchange or suggest a webinar topic at our website, which is listed there, and you can always email me at, again, I'm Carrie Staten, and my email address is on that website as well. Just a couple of quick notes. We will have another webinar in October. I'm currently working to confirm those details, and that will go out later in the next week so that you'll know about that one. And then on November 29th at 2, we're going to have a webinar on riverfront redevelopment featuring Nina Chase from River Life. They're doing some really cool riverfront redevelopment in the Pittsburgh area and have recently expanded their work into West Virginia. So they'll have some great examples and some information on how you can get involved in the work that's starting in West Virginia. So that's it from the exchange background. I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth, but first I just have a couple of housekeeping things. Elizabeth will be taking questions. You can type in your questions in either the chat box or the questions box in your dashboard, and I will keep track of those, and we're going to take a break right in the middle of Elizabeth's presentation to answer those questions, and then we'll do another break at the end to take questions as well. And we will be capturing that, so if we don't get to your question, Elizabeth's contact information is also on her slide so that you can reach out to her directly afterwards. And then I am recording this webinar as I do every webinar, and those will be available on our website, including the PowerPoint, the handout, which Elizabeth will talk about, and then this recording so that you can refer back to it once you get started on your EPA grants. So let's see. All right, Elizabeth, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll do your quick intro. So while Elizabeth's getting her stuff set up, Elizabeth is a licensed site remediation professional, which is comparable to West Virginia's licensed remediation specialist in New Jersey. She's a project manager at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, where she is responsible for providing technical assistance to communities for brownfield redevelopment. She provides one-on-one technical assistance to governments and nonprofits in regions 1, 3, and 4 who are interested in assessing, remediating, and redeveloping brownfield sites. Elizabeth has over 20 years of professional experience in the private and public sectors, and she has provided expert testimony to the United States Senate Committee regarding cleanup efforts at federal facilities. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I am absolutely delighted to be here today to talk to you, everyone, on this webinar about EPA grant writing and how to do a successful grant. First, I want to take you really quickly through the TAB programs for those of you who aren't familiar with who we are so that you can learn about us. We are similar in a lot of ways to your West Virginia Brownfield Technical Assistance Centers. We are funded by the U.S. EPA. We really are intended to serve as an independent resource to communities and nonprofits that are attempting to clean up and reclaim brownfield sites. And by communities, we also include in that government and tribal entities. And the NJIT program covers EPA regions 1, 3, and 4, but there are similar TAB programs for the other regions in the U.S. as well. I just mentioned who can receive it, so you guys know who that is. It's free assistance, and I mean free, doesn't cost you a dime. Even if you have a grant, it doesn't come out of your grant because EPA provides us with grant funds to provide these services to you. What I often tell people is it's easier to tell you what we do than what we don't do. We aren't your environmental consultant. We don't collect samples, we don't analyze samples, and we're not writing phase 1 reports for you. We're not writing grant proposals, but we will review them. Outside of that, it's just such a wide range of services from getting you started, things like explaining environmental laws and providing guidance in the development of strategic planning, to staying on track, helping you manage your brownfield grant projects, providing guidance on that, to getting the job done, advising on remediation methods, helping you to gain community acceptance of brownfield projects. We have a really great website. We're actually also updating it right now, but there's so much good material on it, from frequently asked questions to guidance on how to manage a brownfield site, and you can download materials from previous workshops that we've done. We also provide assistance by conducting community brownfield education, whether that's through things like this, like a webinar, a workshop, or a seminar. We've done lots of different ones. They're usually specific issue-centered, so it could be anything from Brownfields 101 to funding and financing brownfield redevelopments, or we did a whole series on mill redevelopments in the past. So those are available. We also have webinars, and we do have them archived on our website. So it's things like this, like how to prepare a competitive EPA Brownfield grant application, but we also have ones on funding. We have living shorelines to enhance brownfield sites, community engagement for brownfield, so all different kinds of topics for you. Another way we provide assistance is through one-on-one technical mentoring. I mentioned a moment ago that we review grant proposals. We're talking about grant proposals today. If you prepare a EPA Brownfields grant, send us your draft. Send us the Microsoft Word version of your 15-page narrative. Get them to us as early as possible. It is a first-come, first-served basis, and we do have limited capacity. What I will say is the very latest we could review them would be maybe 2 weeks out, because it would give us a week to review it, and then it would give you a week to incorporate those comments. But again, sooner is better. We also do things like answering questions. So you might have a question about like something as simple as how do I log on to acres, to something more complex like what funding sources are available if I have a bracket closure. And that's all services we provide. Just reach out to us and ask, and we can help you with that. We can assist with community involvement. In the past, we've done technical things like we prepared a series of brochures to guide you through the PCB rules under TSCA. And then we also will provide review and analysis and interpretation of technical reports and put that into plain language and communicate that with the public if you want us to as well. So just let us know what kind of assistance you're looking for. If you're looking for some one-on-one assistance, we really love to do that. Give us a chance. If you have ideas for a workshop, a seminar, or a webinar, let us know what it is. We'll do all the work, we'll pull it together, and we'll get the expert speakers, and it'll be free. So reach out to us. Here is our contact information. Probably the easiest thing to do is just tell you to email us at that tab at njit.edu. It's a very informal process. There's no contract to sign. So moving on to today's session. I want to give you an overview of the EPA Brownfields Grant application process. I'm going to give you a to-do list and some helpful hints for each section. We're going to discuss what you need to do to get started. Our goal is to develop a grant program that works for you and EPA. These guidelines should be out in the next couple of weeks. You never know exactly when. They don't tell you in advance, but you typically have 60 days once the guidelines come out to get your proposal put together and submitted. And that said, with the Christmas holiday coming up on December 25th, we would hope that EPA would have these due prior to that. So that would put us in mid-October for them coming out. And I think that's probably about when to expect them. So EPA Brownfield grants have always been competitive. So you've got to do better than the other competitors. You've got to be in that winning section, and that's what we're trying to get you to. One thing we have to remind you, though, is that these grants are reviewed by real people. Despite EPA's best efforts, there's just a high degree of variability in how the same grant could be scored from one year to the next. I also want to tell you, I mentioned before that when we do the grant reviews, but also for this webinar, these are NJIT tab presenter opinions. That's what they are. We're not EPA. We are NJIT tab. But I think that EPA would agree with most of the stuff we're telling you, or if not all of the stuff we're telling you in here. So, with so much competition, it's really that stupid minutia that separates those winning grants from the non-winning grants. And EPA gets so many great grant proposals every year that they need to focus on anything that they can to differentiate the dozens of great proposals that they're reviewing. So minutia becomes that elephant from the vantage point of the reader. So while there's very specific guidance that is used to score the stuff, just remember that reviewers do have subjectivity that comes out in their scoring. And whether that's that they don't understand the information you provided or misinterpret what you have written, their review is what your score is based on. EPA has several different types of competitive brownfield grants. They have assessment grants, which we're going to talk about, property-specific, community-wide, and coalition grants. They have revolving loan fund grants. We're not going to talk about them because they're not offering them this year. They should be offering them, though, I believe, next year. Cleanup grants, which we're going to discuss. Area-wide planning grants, which they just closed the solicitation, I believe, in August. So we're not going to talk about those today. And also workforce development grants and training. And that solicitation is usually in the winter, and we're not going to focus on those today either. So you're really going to hear today about the assessment grants and the cleanup grants because that is the next solicitation that should be coming out shortly. So those assessment grants can be used to inventory, prioritize, assess sites, and you can also do some planning with them. You can plan for your cleanup, and you can link to some redevelopment plans for that. So eligibility, you have your state, local, and tribal governments, general purpose units of local governments, and regional councils or redevelopment agencies. Annually, they typically award around 150 of these. Again, this next solicitation should be in the next couple of weeks. I wanted to give you an idea of what you can submit for. So you can submit 3 grant proposals, which would be 2 community-wide and 1 site-specific under the assessment. Or you could go in on 1 grant as part of a coalition. So what I want to point out here is if you're going in on a coalition grant, all of the partners on the coalition grant can only go in on this 1 grant. If you try to go in for additional ones and EPA notices it, it's going to get kicked out. The other thing I wanted to point out on this is the maximum combined total of $300,000 under the community-wide, which is new for this upcoming solicitation, or at least that's what we're hearing is going to come out. And then you have your site-specific, which is also $200,000 for hazardous substances or up to $200,000 for petroleum, and you can request a waiver for up to $350,000. So we often tell people we think the best one to go for a lot of times is the community-wide, because that gives you a lot of flexibility as to what sites you want to use your grant money on. If you apply for a site-specific grant, then you need to be sure that you are using that money on that site, because that's the only place you can use it. The only reason I would recommend going for a site-specific is if you're already going for either 2 community-wides and you want this additional one, or if you are requesting that waiver because you know it's going to cost you more than $200,000. Again, there's also the coalition grant where you can get together with some of your neighbors and go in as a group, and that's for up to $600,000, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So here, the property-specific grants again, $200,000 hazardous petroleum, you can get that waiver. You do need to pass a property and ownership eligibility threshold requirement. That's important. You need to own that property. So keep that in mind. You may also apply for a community-wide grant. Again, community-wide, these are the most flexible. $200,000 for hazardous substances and or $200,000 for petroleum. However, there is a new rule that the maximum amount is $300,000. Again, there's no waiver of funding limit on this one, and if you apply for this, you can also apply for a site-specific grant, and the performance period is 3 years. The coalition grant, $600,000, again, no waiver of the funding limit. You must have at least 3 eligible entities, and together you must assess a minimum of 5 sites. And again, there's no double dipping here. You cannot go in for a coalition grant and apply for a community-wide or a site-specific grant on your own or as part of another coalition. What we like to tell people is the best assessment grant applications are for projects where you really have already identified a specific area that's in need of assessment, so you know what you're using this money for, you have a good idea. Property owners are on board, that you have access, they're going to allow you on the site to do this, and when you have significant redevelopment or revitalization potential as well. EPA really likes to see all those things in a good assessment grant application. For the cleanup grants, the purpose of a cleanup grant is really to carry out those cleanup activities. Cleanup grants are site-specific funding to clean up, to conduct the cleanup after that assessment work has been completed. So you really want to begin on a shovel-ready cleanup, or you're going to be supplementing some ongoing cleanup activities. And these funds can be used for remediation. So that could be reporting, it could be overseeing cleanup construction, environmental oversight, even monitoring institutional controls. The funds can also be used for health monitoring and purchasing environmental insurance, and typically they award about 60 of these annually. And again, the next solicitation should be in a couple of weeks for this. So for those cleanup grants, the eligible entities are the same as we just mentioned for the assessment grants. The local governments, the states and the tribes, the quasi-governmental entities, plus nonprofits can apply for this, 501c3 nonprofits. For the funding, you can get up to 3 properties, so you can put in up to 3 proposals, and up to $200,000 per property per proposal for hazardous substances or petroleum. The eligible entity, whoever's applying, has to own the property prior to applying. EPA means fee simple. Gotta have the deed, you gotta own the property. If you don't own it already, then you need to get moving right now to make sure that you do. Cost share, you need to supply 20%. Some of that can be 20% in-kind services. There's also an opportunity to apply for a hardship waiver as well. We think the best cleanup grant applications are projects where you own the property, because that's one of the requirements, and that you're not the responsible party, also one of the requirements. The site should be fully characterized, and you should have a remediation plan and some good cost estimates. The best applications really have this stuff nailed down. This is what makes for a more competitive application, is really having this information. EPA loves to see leveraging of additional funds, and so the more concrete those are, the better. And EPA loves to see that you have a redevelopment plan as well. So if you have all those things, you can write a really good, compelling grant application or proposal. So I wanted to take you through the EPA Brownfields Grant application process. Typically, the guidance is issued in the fall, and again, we're talking in a couple of weeks here. Then EPA takes those, they vet the applications, they look at threshold eligibility in the early winter. If you pass go, your proposal will then go on to be scored and ranked in the early spring. EPA then notifies you in the spring if you have an award. You'll get your cooperative agreement application, you'll submit that in June, and you should receive your cooperative agreement in October. So as you can see, we're really looking at about a year is how long it takes from the time of your submission to getting your money. And a lot of people have projects that are really anxious to get moving, and the question comes up all the time, can I spend the money before the cooperative agreement is in place? And that answer is a qualified no. Eligible to spend the dollars until the agreement is signed. Any dollars spent on the cleanup cannot count as a match if they were spent before the agreement was in place. That said, if you do get a waiver from your regional office that would allow you to spend the money at risk up to 90 days prior to getting the agreement in place. But make sure you have that approval ahead of time. So let's say you've decided this is the program for you. How do you get this money? You really want to develop a program that appeals to not only you, but also to EPA. You need to develop a specific focus to your grant program that is based on the unique needs of your community. Generic doesn't get funded. So you've got to talk about what is your story, and this should really be an intersection of the community needs and the community benefits. In terms of writing a successful application, the most important takeaway that I can give you in terms of coming up with a successful grant application is to know what the focus of your application is. You need to know what differentiates your application from the hundreds of others that EPA is getting. You need to have a constant theme that runs throughout your application, from that first section where it talks about community needs, through the project description, through the budget, all the way through the project benefits. It really needs to hang together to tell a story and to set your application, your community, and your project apart from the others. What we tell people is think of it as if you were writing a novel. You start out with the foreshadowing by introducing the characters and the setting. That's that community needs section. Then you move to that action plot line in the project description. What is it that you are going to do with EPA's money? And you flesh the details of that out in the budget table. In the end, you bring it all home with the project benefits and tie up loose ends. Again, it all has to tie together. You can't have plot lines that die or things that come up in the project benefits that weren't previously discussed in your proposal. What we often tell people is at first, when EPA first gets to your community needs, you want them to cry and go, oh my God, everything is so terrible here. I'm so sad for them. This is just awful. To the ending where they're smiling saying, oh, if I give them this money, they are going to be able to fix all of those awful problems that they have, and everything is going to be great in this community. So go from crying to smiling. That's what we tell people. We also tell you you're writing a drama, not a mystery. Do not leave anything out. Requirements to submit a proposal. this is relatively new. They did this last year. This year they are getting totally strict with this. There are not going to be any exceptions, I'm being told. You need to submit through grants.gov. So if you don't know how to do that, learn how to do that. Go on their website. There's some tools and tips available. You need to have a DUNS number, and you need to register it in that sam.gov website now. Even if you're already registered in sam.gov, make sure your account is active and will be active by the deadline. This is so important. The account must be renewed annually by the e-business point of contact. There were a lot of issues last year. Even if you are up to date today, you might not be active on the date that this is due, and that is a big problem. So you've got to make sure that you're not just looking at today, but looking at when it's due. And there were also instances last year where the authorized organization representative who submits the proposal had left the organization, and nobody knew their information to be able to log in and submit the proposal. So make sure all that is squared away. We don't want anyone on this webinar to have any of those problems. Also new this year, EPA is going to verify the DUNS number that's listed on your application to ensure it's the correct number for your organization. If it is not, the EPA may deem your application ineligible, and you don't want that to happen. We're talking about getting an early start, and you guys all on here are getting that early start because you're on here before those guidelines come out. EPA has prepared an early start guidance, and if you check on your control window here on the webinar and you look under handouts, you will see this document right there. It's called Getting Started Early ARC.doc, and go ahead and download that. Keep a copy of that. Take a look at it. I think it's really helpful. It lists activities that you can perform in advance of the guidelines being released. You know, a lot of applicants find it's just difficult to prepare the proposals in only 60 days, which is, again, typically the amount of time that this is due. And there's just so many activities you can be doing now, and that's what this document will take you through. The to-do list. All right, so first thing we want you to do is reach out to EPA now. Your friends at your regional office, they're your friends. This is not an enforcement program. Reach out to them. They can help you. What I have to tell you, too, is once the guidelines come out, EPA gets a lot more tight-lipped on what they can say. At that point, they really can only discuss eligibility and threshold. But prior to that, they can talk to you about a lot of different things. So reach out to them now. If this is not your first bite at the apple, if you had applied last year but didn't get funded, reach out to your EPA officer and get a debrief. Find out why your grant was not funded last time, and request your score on each section. So that way you can look at the total of points available that were available for the section and see how well you did. And then you'll know right away which sections need more work. I would also recommend that you beg, you plead, you do whatever it is that you have to do to ask that EPA debriefer for a written summary of comments by the EPA reviewers that ranked your proposal. Now, they won't be able to provide you with a score sheet that lists those comments, but in the past, they have provided a summary when you begged and pleaded. So next thing I would say, find out when your region is doing their grant proposals. Now, we're talking to most people right now in West Virginia, so find out when Region 3 is doing their grant presentations and participate in those, attend them. This is where you're going to hear about what information needs to be included section by section. For current grantees, clean up any outstanding reporting requirements that you might have. If anything is late, get them in now. Your EPA project officer is responsible for reviewing your programmatic capability and how you manage your grants. Give them that vote of confidence so they're not going to be lying when they said you did a good job and you're up to date on everything. If your EPA officer is not satisfied with your efforts to date, you better get a move For site-specific applications, you can vet your site eligibility. This is a very complicated process. We don't want to spend hours on it, but we certainly could. So what we would recommend is that you ask your EPA project officer about that now. Also, reach out to them, talk to them, say, this is what I'm thinking about doing. This is the program that I think I want to submit. Tell them what you're looking to fund. For instance, if you tell them, I'm going to submit an application for a park and I'm going to include some park benches in that, they're going to tell you, you cannot do that with a cleanup grant. That's an ineligible cost. You can ask them, you know, what kind of angle should I be using? What's going to work? You want to learn what's eligible for funding and learn what it is that ideally they want to fund. Maybe, you know, this year they can say, we think our focus is going to be on sea level rise, or it's going to be on planning efforts, or whatever it's going to be, so you can align your proposal with what EPA is looking to fund. It's really a conversation that's worth having, and you need to do it before the guidelines come out. The next up is building a team. You know, this is really important after you've talked to EPA. Build your team, identify your partners that are going to help you implement your grant program. You have a grant story with a focus. What is it that you're going to need to implement that grant program? Who do you need to have involved? If you're looking to focus a cleanup grant on a particular site, do you have the residents on board? Is there a community economic development corporation that has been working in that neighborhood? If so, get them on board, get their support. There's a really big section on partners, and health department is a problem that everyone seems to struggle with. You need to think about who your health department is and what role they can play when you're implementing your grant. So just work on that now. Think about how you could incorporate them. One thing we like to recommend in pulling together your team is to make sure that you have at least one community economic development organization, at least one community advocacy organization, an academic institution like your community college or a local university. Also, you need a environmental or grassroots advocacy group, and try to get a faith-based organization as well. You are required to provide the name of all these organizations, a description of them, and their role. And you'll need to include a letter from them explaining what their commitment is going to be. So look for those organizations now, start developing those relationships. Next up is get your paper on. So we were just talking about these support letters, right? You need to get them from the folks that you've identified who are going to be on your team. You need to include their mission, their involvement in the implementation of this program, and what their contribution is going to be. So hopefully they could provide you with meeting space, or even better, with money or in-kind assistance for a particular project. Just think what it is that they could bring to the table and leverage that in your application. One thing to note, if all the letters are the same from all of the community groups, you're going to score low. You need to have individual letters. So one of the things we like to recommend when you reach out to these nonprofits and community-based organizations, and even your state regulatory agency, prepare a one-page fact sheet for your project and discuss the project and the grant and what it is that you're going to do with the money. Now, you may also want to give them a template with their mission, what they have done, and what they will do. But the letter really needs to be unique from each one and needs to be in their voice. One last note on this slide is about authorizing resolutions. Now, EPA really doesn't care at all about this, but your business administrator may. So if you need to get an authorization from your city council to put in for an application, apply for it, accept it, and do all that fun paperwork, take care of it now. Again, you're only going to have 60 days once the guidelines come out, and sometimes getting on the docket takes some time. So if that's an internal requirement you have, we would recommend that you take care of that now. Get that letter from your state environmental regulatory agency. Every single application needs to have that letter. EPA just wants some assurance that you're not operating in a vacuum and that your state DEP is on board with the project. We don't want them to say, oh my God, why would you have given these people that money? We don't want them to do work on that site. So this is just a level of assurance for EPA. So if you've submitted an application in prior years, one note is you cannot use last year's letter. You still need to get a new letter. You need a fresh letter every single year for that particular grant application. Do it now. Give your one-page fact sheet to West Virginia DEP and or your Brownfield Technical Assistance Centers, and they may be able to help you to obtain that letter. For site-specific petroleum assessment or cleanup proposals, some states will do the petroleum eligibility for the sites in lieu of EPA doing it, and I believe that is the case in West Virginia. Talk to your Brownfield Technical Assistance Centers and the West Virginia DEP. Get that letter going now if you're going to be doing one of those. Coalition assessment grants. If you're thinking of going for one of these, you really need to have discussions with the targeted communities and get all of the partners on board now. Figure out who's going to be the lead on it, and then each community that's going to be a part of this really has to run it up their flagpole and make sure that their organization wants to be on it. Now remember, if you're going for a coalition, any coalition team member that you include in your grant proposal is not eligible to submit a community-wide assessment grant this year. In other words, no double dipping. If you are doing a coalition assessment grant, you're going to want to have a community meeting that garners grassroots support and helps identify sites in all of the communities represented in your coalition. The guidance is also going to talk about an MOA that's required. That's not required at the time of application, but it is required that your agreement, when your agreement comes into play, which is about a year from now. So all the folks on the coalition are going to have to sign on and agree to be part of that coalition. Cleanup grants. First thing I just want to mention, AAI, all appropriate inquiry, make sure you have done your due diligence. You need to have secure ownership. Again, you have to own it at the time you submit the application. Fee simple. You need to have completed a phase 2 investigation or equivalent. It can be draft, but you do need to have that in hand before the application goes in. You're going to need to provide the date of the phase 2 in your proposal. You're also going to need to prepare a draft ABCA or analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, and that actually needs to be included with the grant proposal. You should also be reviewing the requirements and begin your public notification. EPA has some very specific language about what they want done for this, so review those requirements from last year and begin that public notification now. Work on your detailed cost estimate for your cleanup activities. If you submit a cleanup proposal to EPA that says, hey EPA, we need $200,000 to clean up this site, thank you very much, it is not going to work. EPA wants to know what you're doing with their $200,000. So for instance, if you've calculated that you have 100 cubic yards of soil that needs to go off-site at $62 a yard for transportation and disposal, put all that information in there. EPA wants that level of detail. The more definitive your remediation plan is, the more competitive your application is. If you do not know what your plan is, you either haven't done enough community involvement, you don't have an end use identified, and your budget is going to be called into question. So next thing is you need to identify and secure funding for your 20% match and the balance of any funding needed for cleanups that are going to cost more than $240,000. The more assured you can make EPA feel that you have that 20% match in hand, the better off you're going to be. EPA, if it's going to cost more than $240,000, let EPA know where you're going to get the rest of that money to complete the cleanup. Without those things, EPA is less likely to fund your grant. But don't commit to greater than 20%, because if you do, they're going to require you to provide it and document it. Some general tips and tricks, overall observations to keep in mind when you're writing your grant proposal. Once the guidelines come out, read them. This is really your roadmap. You need to follow directions and read the entire directions. Use the headers, use the outlines, use the bullets that are provided in the solicitation. This way the EPA reviewers are going to know exactly which section you're trying to answer. They're going to have a score sheet that they're filling out, and all of those various points you're trying to hit should come right in the order so they can just go straight down the list and score your application in the easiest and most straightforward way. Write as though the reader knows absolutely nothing about your community. The review panel is going to consist of several people. One of them will be from your region, but the others will not. And if it's an area of the country that's vastly different, they may not understand what's going on. So again, because there's going to be a regional representative on your panel, you want to talk to your EPA regional office now because they can serve as an advocate for you on that national panel. But you need to make it easy for them. You need to put all the information in your application so that everything is there. Next is address all criteria. If it doesn't apply, say so and explain why. Take this to heart on all different pieces of the applications, from I'm not able to get demographic information for my town because it's so small that the census tracts are so small and they don't publish that information, or whatever the case may be. Maybe there hasn't been a health study in my area and that's why I'm not able to provide specific statistics, but this is what I can tell you about the health of my community. Put everything out there, what you're including and why, and what you are not able to, and include why. The reviewers will take all that into account. There's usually a proposal checklist that's going to be associated with the solicitation. If there is, we recommend you use that. EPA is really strict about not having more attachments than they allow. They typically don't allow maps and graphics, so don't include those. And just make sure you do include everything that is required. Next is to be kind to your reviewers. Minimize the use of acronyms and technical organizational alphabet soups associated with your area. EPA may not understand what they are, and it's just harder for them to read that kind of application. You don't want your reviewer to be frustrated when they're scoring your application. You want to make it as easy as possible on them. So I also recommend that you use white space, and what I mean by that is don't try to cram as much as you can into the 15 pages by shrinking the font and changing the spacing between lines. Make sure that there's some white space on that paper. And last is don't rely on those past successes. Keep the application forward focused. We recommend you get an outside editor, someone in-house that maybe could be someone who's in-house, who isn't as close to the program, who's going to check for readability, consistent message, and NJIT is available to review your grant proposal from a content standpoint, but we're not able to provide an editor to fix awkward construction, grammar, or spelling, and things like that. Decide what your story is. You know, if only half of the grants are getting funded, then you need to make sure that you have a compelling story that makes the reviewer relate to your community and sets you apart from the other half that doesn't get funded. So you need to clearly define your priorities and weave it throughout your application. Keep out extraneous stuff. It distracts from your story. Keep it real and make sure your assertions are backed up with data and/or examples. And if you don't know something, don't just skip it. Check out the EPA's FAQ page. Make sure what you put into your budget is eligible. Make sure it fits into what the EPA is looking to fund. Make sure the time frame works for you and the funding program. Again, you're not going to have this money in your hand to spend for at least another year. So can your project wait that long, or do you have a developer breathing down your neck and you need it now? If you do, it might not be the right program for you. Again, we've mentioned this a couple times. Tell a story. I can't say it enough. What problems does your community have that this assessment or cleanup grant is going to fix? What are the community needs that this is going to address? Make sure you have the data to support those needs and to support the benefits that you will get out of the grant. Just be as specific as you can be. Quantify, quantify, quantify. This is such a competitive process. The reviewers are looking for anything where they can differentiate between the ones they're going to award and not award. Not because they're mean people. They're not looking to do this because they're mean. They need to do this to differentiate between the applications. So make sure you get all the points you can. And quantifying really helps bring some of those points on your side. Make sure you have what you have in your budget is realistic. Don't say I'm putting aside $10 and I'm going to do a door-to-door and visit with every resident in my community to discuss brownfields. Obviously, $10 is not enough to do that. We've also seen a lot of grant applications where there's only like $2,000 to do a phase 1, which is maybe kind of small amount, but that may very well be the norm in your community. If so, say that, back it up, justify it. Say we're doing 5 phase 1s at $2,000 each, and this is the average in our community based on previous experience. Just give the reviewer some indication that you didn't just make that number up. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to take any questions that we have so far.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We haven't had any come in the next few minutes, in the last half hour, but I'm going to give people a chance to type those and just point out a couple of things from the Brownfield Center. There's a few things that we can help with that NJIT doesn't do because they're not in West Virginia. So one thing that we can help with is we can help get that letter for you from the state DEP. We work very closely with them. So if you're in the northern part of the state, you can contact the Northern West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center and let us know about your project. And if you're at the Southern Center, you can contact George Carrico, and I think he may be with us right now. We can also write letters of support, both centers, and we can help you with the actual grant writing. But we need to know that you're planning to write a grant soon, because we have a lot of people that we're aware of already, and we just want to make sure that we have enough time to help. We won't write the whole thing for you, but we can help you with some sections and do a review in addition to the review that NJIT may be able to do, because I think Elizabeth will agree, the more eyes, the better.
I was just going to say that. The more eyes, the better on this.
And if you are, if it's a project that we're already working with you on, that we're aware of, that we've been sort of in the trenches on together, then we can definitely be one of those partners, and we can write a letter of support that maybe includes some of our technical assistance that helps with your match. It just depends. That's just a project-to-project sort of thing. But you should definitely reach out to whoever your current contact is at the Brownfield Center that you're working with, or if you haven't worked with us before, we also want to hear from you. And I'm still not seeing any questions, so just remember, guys, that you can type those in at any time. I am watching them, and then when we get to the end, Elizabeth will answer your questions, and then we'll also share our contact information so that you can ask questions that you think of later, because I'm sure that you're sort of in info overload. There's a lot to know about EPA grants.
There is. There's so much to know. And I'm trying to go through it as quick as I can because I want to get as much information in your hands as I can. These are the main sections of the guidelines. They're up on your screen. There's 5 major criteria. That has not changed. We don't expect that to change for this year. Each major area has sub-criterion. The guidelines are being revised and revamped, so make sure you carefully read this year's guidelines, but it really does help to review last year's at this stage. So the first section is that community need, and when you're doing like a community-wide assessment, we recommend that you select 2 or 3 target sites that you can think back on and use, so you can have more specific community needs or ills and specific project benefits, because it really helps to clearly define those projects and the communities, and you need to keep it consistent throughout your application. Make sure you discuss those cumulative impacts and how they disproportionately impact your target population. The unspoken words here are really environmental justice. Describe in detail the type of brownfield you're going to address. Talk about the type of contaminants. Find specific health-related statistics. Everybody has trouble with this. We know they're not easy to find. Talk to your local health officials. Check out state health studies. Contact your local hospitals. See if they're aware of any studies. Check out your academic institutions and maybe some local nonprofits that might have an interest in these matters, and then make sure you link that back to your target populations, the contaminants identified at the brownfield sites, and the health studies, and then cite your sources. Quantify, quantify, quantify. We can't say that enough. Don't say something like our community suffers from a disproportionate number of aging housing stock. and high vacancy rates, but don't provide any statistics to back it up. Without that data, it's just anecdotal, and it doesn't really strengthen your proposal. So make sure you have that data. So in the last section, you just told EPA, I had so many problems. That's where they're crying. They're going, oh my God, I can't believe how terrible things are in this community. And then this part is where you say, and not only that, I don't have enough money to fix it, and we need your money, EPA. So even if your demographics aren't the most competitive from EPA's standpoint, that doesn't mean that you don't need these funds. In this section, you have to convince the reviewer that despite your numbers, you really are a needy community. So again, be consistent with your defined targeted community. This is not where you want to paint your community in a positive light. You need to talk about issues that maybe increase costs, like maybe you have higher transportation costs or higher utility costs. We always recommend drilling down to targeted census tracts if need be, if that's possible. Depending on the size of your community, it may not be. Talk about any budget slashing measures that may have been implemented and why you need this money and your lack of budget in your small towns to maybe be able to address this. If you're an existing grantee, you need to talk about why is more money needed, and you need to be consistent with financial need and leverage funding for projects. The next up is the project descriptions. This is where you give the executive summary of your story. You did some foreshadowing in that community needs section by setting the stage. You introduce the setting and the characters, and now you're going to lay out that plot line for the reviewers. You, again, are not writing a drama. You're writing a drama, not a mystery, so you don't want to leave anything to interpretation. You want to start working with your brownfield partners now to develop the program that's going to be the subject of this grant proposal. Decide what the focus of it is, what sites you want to prioritize, or the process that you're going to use to prioritize those sites if it's going to be done after you get the money, and start thinking about what types of sites you plan to address with the grant funding and other key aspects of your program. As more details of your program are developed, you should be able to start drafting a budget of how much money it's going to take to perform those tasks. In addition, start looking for ways that you can leverage additional funding now. Ideally, assessing brownfield sites has been identified as a need in some sort of recent planning document that you can cite that has had lots of community input. Maybe you have a plan for a waterfront development and targeted sites are all along your targeted brownfield sites are all along your waterway. Maybe you have a downtown revitalization plan or an economic development strategy. Whatever it is, if possible, mention it. Talk about strategic plans and discuss timing as well. Be forward thinking. EPA does not just want a bunch of sites assessed. They want sites redeveloped. Assessment is the first step, but you need to demonstrate that you have a plan for moving these sites to remediation and redevelopment. You need to have an end use in mind, and you need to know what it takes to get there. Again, you need to be unique. What is it that you can say that others can't? And I can say, you know, West Virginia, you think about, for me, somebody who's not from West Virginia, one thing that I think makes your state unique is all of the coal mining and the coal mining industry and how that has affected from brownfields to the environment to economic. So those are things that you can talk about that somebody in, say, Florida is not going to be able to talk about. So think about those kinds of things. Again, you want to write that compelling story that sets your community apart, and you want to be clear as to what prior work you're building upon and what is going to be funded through this grant. Linkages, go back to that first section. Is there a community need, a health issue that you aren't addressing in this section? If so, you need to either address it or go back and delete it. You need to make sure you tie up all your plot lines. You can't say you have a high incidence of lead poisoning, but I'm only focusing on brownfield sites that have PCBs. Describe your site selection process. If you have an advisory committee, how are they going to be involved? How are you going to prioritize the sites? Discuss the process. for selecting sites for phase 1s and phase 2s, enrolling in your voluntary cleanup program, and involving the community. Allow for additional sites beyond your program focus. You could say something like it's anticipated that the majority of funds will be spent on X, Y, and Z, but this is a community-wide application. Existing grantees, discuss your existing administrative process, your team, and how you have used the funds. Does your current structure work, or will it be changed? Don't really get caught up on focusing on your overall success here. Save that toot your own horn stuff for the capabilities section. Your task description and budget. This is really the heart of your application, the climax of your story. You lay out very precisely exactly what you're going to do with this money. Provide detail and backup and make sure it follows from the community need and project description and sets up your finale, which is the project benefits. The budget is an opportunity for you to make crystal clear exactly how the money will be used. It gives you the chance to convince the reviewer that your project has been thoroughly thought through and is reasonable and achievable. We recommend that people use a spreadsheet with formulas inserted into a Word document to ensure there are no mathematical or transcription errors. You need to provide detail to those numbers. Ideally, salaries should be less than 10% of the budget. That's what EPA people are telling me. Maybe you could go to 15 to 20% of the budget, but you know, really try to make most of it to be contractual. You want to say I'm doing 10 phase 1s at $5K each, which is $50,000. Also, I recommend to people that you include money to attend the National Brownfields Conference and perhaps some local brownfield programs as well. You need to link your budget to the rest of the application, specifically to the project program description, activities, and roles. If you mention that you're doing 4 phase 2s in the project description, make sure that your budget shows that you're doing 4 phase 2s. Leveraging. EPA knows that $200,000 is not enough money to assess every site that needs assessment. They want to see you have actual commitments to address the need and take the site through the next phases so there's a redevelopment at the end of the day. Use real funds and make a connection of how you're going to leverage it. Indicate if it's definite that you have the funds, or otherwise how likely it is that you might obtain that funding. Have you applied? Have you won before? Things like that. You need to include specific commitments. Spend some time getting those commitment letters from grantors, financial institutions, and developers with numbers. If you're an existing grantee, you can use examples of past project leveraging to demonstrate your ability to leverage. And remember, if you have an advisory committee providing support, you can in-kind contribution, or even EPA grantee in-kind as leveraging. For community engagement and partnerships, this section is really to describe your outreach to effective people who have a role in the project or who are impacted because they live nearby. You need to provide a description of and role of the key community-based organizations involved in your project. So that could be local citizen or business groups, environmental or civic organizations, educational institutions, and local labor organizations. Describe how the community is engaged and involved in your project. Attach letters from all community-based organizations mentioned that describe their roles and affirm any reference commitments. We know some of your communities, especially in West Virginia, could be pretty homogeneous and that you may not have a need for translation services, but if you don't address this requirement, you will not get the full points on this section. So remind the reviewer that you have no non-English speaking people, but assure them that should the need arise, you will provide those translation services. Also, know the difference between informing and involving. Just providing brochures or doing outreach to the local Chamber of Commerce misses 2 big items on EPA's wish list. 1, involving the community, which EPA sees as Mr. and Mrs. Smith who live next door to your site. And 2, giving Mr. and Mrs. Smith the opportunity and platform to engage with you on that project. That is what EPA wants to see. I see that we're at 3 o'clock, Carrie. Maybe we can go. There are any additional questions at this time, and if people need to leave, they can, and otherwise I can stay on for like another 10 minutes and finish up on some other tips and tricks in the other sections.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
We do have 2 questions, and so guys, go ahead and start thinking if you want to type a couple more in while I'm asking these. The first question is 2 parts. What percentage of last year's applications were funded, and do you know how much funding is available this year?
I do not have those answers. EPA has them. Last year, I had noted somewhere that in the beginning about how many are typically funded, but percentage-wise, I'm not sure how many were submitted versus how many were funded. The previous year, I think they had about half of the assessment grants were funded.
Great. And the second question is, can cleanup grants be used for the demolition of structures?
It's a little tricky. If, let's say, you have an underground storage tank that needs to be removed in order to remediate a site, and that underground storage tank is beneath a structure, then EPA, I believe, will allow that to be an eligible cost. But in general, these funds are not for building demolition, so there needs to be sort of some kind of tie-in like that. What I would recommend, though, is talking to your EPA regional office and see what they can recommend for that type of situation.
Right.
Are there any other questions, Carrie?
Those are the only ones I have right now.
Okay, then I will continue on. If anybody does need to leave, we certainly understand. We don't want to keep you over if you have other things to attend to, but I do have a couple more slides if you are interested in sticking around. So back to community engagement. EPA is also looking for partnerships with government agencies. So this is where you're going to describe not only your government agencies, but also in this section, at least in the previous years, and this may move, I'm not sure, this is where you also describe how you're going to keep the EPA dollars in your community by hiring locally. So first thing you want to do is begin forming and establishing partnerships that are critical to the success of your program. You want to establish relationships with local and state health officials to discuss how they're going to work with your Brownfields program. Maybe they could sit on your advisory committee or receive copies of all reports, or maybe they could assist with communicating risk to the public. You want to include federal agencies that are touched on in your leveraging section. And of course, don't forget your friends at EPA and West Virginia DEP. Community engagement and partnerships with community-based organizations. This is where you're going to state who your partner organizations are and list out how it is that they're going to contribute to the success of your project. And if you remember before, we talked about a draft one-page flyer where you talk about what your project is, what the program is, and how you're planning to use this money. So provide that draft one-page flyer. You could have those draft support letters with suggested language as to their role and commitment in implementing your program, but again, they really need to be unique support letters that are in the voice of that organization. If you have a lot of CBOs, consider listing them in a table where you name the organization, the contact name, the phone number, their role or commitment, and what they're going to do for the project. Program benefits, health, welfare, and the environment. So this benefits section is really your grand finale. This is where you're going to be able to tie it together and end with a flourish. You have built up the crescendo. Now you are going to leave them wiping away their tears as they envision how these funds are going to transform your community and bring good health and prosperity to all of your residents. And again, it can be difficult to define those benefits when the projects aren't even known yet. but you have to demonstrate a level of understanding on how those benefits can and will be achieved. So go back to the community needs section, make a list of every community ill that is contained in the text, then go through the project benefits section to make sure that it is addressed in this section. If it's not going to be addressed within the short and long-term impacts associated with implementing your new EPA funding, consider striking that community need, and it's probably taking up too much real estate in your proposal. Again, you only get 15 pages. So, program benefits, economic and community benefits. You want to generate specific numbers. EPA loves the quantify, quantify, quantify. So you could have specific numbers on jobs created or taxes generated. Extrapolate if you need to. You could talk about representative projects that have already been done. You need to tie this back to your community needs again, to the program description and the outcomes. All right, so let's say this is a community-wide assessment grant and you don't even know what sites you're going to address, let alone what the reuse is. So how is it that you're supposed to come up with actual numbers? Look at your targets. If you say that you're going to address a total of 5 sites and your focus is on mixed-use development in the downtown, estimate how many temporary and permanent jobs could be created on a typical site, then multiply that by 5 sites. Take a look at the taxes generated on a similar project in the general area. Now multiply that by 5. Make sure you include some qualifiers so the reviewer understands that these are estimates. Think about what mechanisms you will have put in place to create opportunities for local workers to be hired with these grant funds. And then lastly, we see in this section a lot of people start to introduce green space because EPA mentions green space as a project benefit, even though it didn't appear anywhere else in their proposal before that. You know, and we recognize that most projects can point to some kind of green benefit, whether it's an reduction in impervious surface because an old building was removed, a stream buffer, an area of stormwater recharge, or even landscaped parking areas. However, if there really isn't anything, don't force it and just don't choose the section to introduce the idea for the first time. Programmatic capability and past performance. Now, this section is scored by your friends at your EPA regional office. They know you because you already have established a relationship because we've told you to reach out to them, right? They know your past performance if you've had a previous grant, and they're allowed to take all that into account. So don't spend a lot of real estate on this particular section. Just make sure you answer the mail. Tracking and measuring progress, some strategies for this. Just be very specific in what the outcomes and outputs are. Be very specific about how you're going to track it, both short-term and long-term. Tell them that you will do everything in acres. Refer back to the outputs identified in your budget. Make sure they're lining up. And refer back to that community needs section. Make sure this all ties together. So that's it for all of the tips and tricks for each section. Again, this year you have to go through grants.gov. So after you submit this, you will get some notification emails. After signing and successfully submitting your package within 24 to 48 hours, you should receive a notification email with the following subject lines. And you can see them below, you know, grant, whatever number, grants.gov submission receipt, and grant number and grants.gov submission validation receipt for your application. If you do not receive either notification, that means your proposal did not transmit successfully. You would need to contact grants.gov. Their help desk is open 24/7 except for federal holidays. The phone number is right here. Make sure you get a case number. Again, in the event that you experience any kind of technical difficulty transmitting your proposal, refer to the procedures in Appendix 2 in the guidelines. If you don't have the technical capability to apply electronically through grants.gov because of limited or no internet access, which I can't imagine anybody on this webinar would have, but if you had that problem and you're unable to upload the required application materials, please refer to the procedures and application in Appendix 2 of the guidelines. After your application is retrieved out of grants.gov by EPA, you should receive the following notification message, and it's going to have the grant number, grants.gov, grantor agency retrieval receipt for application, and the grant number, grants.gov, agency tracking assignment for application. Proposals that are not successfully submitted and validated by the deadline will be considered late and will be rejected. EPA is very serious about that this year, so you've got to get it in. We recommend, giving yourself a little extra time. I know it's hard. Everybody always wants to do it at the last minute, but try to plan and be able to submit it a couple days before the deadline if possible, so that you can make sure you have all this information, and then if there's any technical difficulties you can address it then. I did want to put in a plug for the National Brownfields Conference, which is going to be in Pittsburgh, not this year but next year. Save the date, December 5th through 7th. And then lastly, I have my contact information here. I know we had a lot of information. Like Carrie said, this is going to be available online, so you can take some time to look at it. We know it takes a lot of work to write a good grant application, and it takes even more work to turn a good one into a great one. You have a lot of people that are available to help you. We're here if needed. Reach out to us, reach out to your Brownfield Technical Assistance Centers, be reaching out to EPA before the guidelines come out. And with that, if there's any additional questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We did have one more come in. In general, besides the lead, what are the members of a coalition actually committing to?
Well, they're committing to being a part of this grant application. So let's say you have 3 towns that say we're all going to be part of the coalition. Each one is going to have sites that are going to be assessed in their community. And I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure EPA has it in the proposal guidelines that I think it's something like at least 1 site in each community needs to be assessed or something like that. And overall, together as a coalition, you need to assess at least 5 sites. And you need to have at least 3 different organizations to be part of a coalition.
Great. All right, well, I don't see any other questions. I want to thank Elizabeth very much for giving us her time and expertise this afternoon. I hope that you all got a lot of great information. I was certainly taking notes, and I've been doing this for 5 years now, so I think that was a lot of good information. And as you process it, you can always send notes or questions to me or to Elizabeth directly, and we are happy to answer those. And I will send out an email to everyone who registered for the webinar once the recording and the handouts and the PowerPoint are available on our website, which will be early next week at the latest. All right, thank you everyone for joining us, and good luck with your EPA grants, and I hope to hear from many of you soon to hear about all the great things that you're applying for.